Check out our online training programs. If you're a competitor in CrossFit, check out TTT Compete. For those of you that want to look good and feel good, check out TTT Fitness. Head to trainingthinktank.com for more info.
I'm not even going to go.
Yeah, but that was like
for the actual
that was like
podcast.
a normal cramp session for me. Hey, it's beginning. Welcome to the Cramp podcast,
the Corpus Animus Cramp podcast.
Getting ready to share our craziest cramp stories. You guys were in the middle of one and then you stopped.
Yeah, well, I think we wanted to share it on the actual podcast. So what we're going to be talking about today is cramping, the concept of like exercise induced muscle cramping, which there is a ton of misinformation that exists out there. Yep. I'm not sure that we're going to necessarily use this podcast to like educate people about cramps, but
that's what we got the classroom series for, brah.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think maybe some of it will get sprinkled in here, but mostly we just want to relate some cramp stories and
yeah, I
like
think 2/3 of the people at this table have cramped probably 2/3 of the entire volume in the gym.
Have you ever had an exercise induced cramp other than like a side stitch?
Yes.
You have?
Yes.
We talked about one with the endurance race.
Yeah, the very first Olympic distance triathlon that I did. I was so, when Mike was putting his classroom series together, one of the things that he was talking about was this idea of fluid balance and electrolyte balance. And I remember when I was training for my triathlon, the triathlon coach that I had at the time, he was very much in the camp of you need to overhydrate. You need to make sure that you have enough water in your system, because if you are dehydrated at all, your body is going to cramp up, seize up, you're going to lose performance, everything else. So like I drank water like it was my job for the first, I would say 72 hours leading into it. And then even throughout the race, as soon as I got off the bike and tried to start running, both calves, like the bottoms of my feet were cramping up. And I was like, what happened? I was drinking so much water. I can't believe this. And so I like fucked my way through the rest of the run.
Hyperhydrated.
I would run a little bit and then walk and try and stretch, and then run a little bit and walk and try and stretch. And it was the most frustrating, painful experience of I think that was a 10K Olympic distance. I forget.
Yeah.
But oh my gosh, that was so painful.
How long was the run? Was it 10K
at that point? I think so. And I was cramping.
That's an Olympic try
within the first 100 yards of that run, I started cramping.
So you had an hour at least.
It was awful.
It was awful.
And it was in the California hills. And so it was up and down hills. Like I remember going up backwards some of them because my calves literally couldn't take the pressure of walking.
Oh man. That's the worst feeling, when you feel it start to come on and you know you're like at the beginning of it.
Yeah. I'm not as experienced as you guys, but that is the one cramp story that I have. And it was
Is that
torturous.
the only time you've had exercise induced cramps?
That's really the only time. And then afterwards I remember thinking like
last night.
Yeah. I had them yesterday.
Yeah.
No, I'm excited to hear your guys' stories. Your war stories are better than mine.
Just to kind of battle that, and I think that's part of why I created the cramp course was, I guess anecdotally, you assume that it was because of hyperhydration, but what did your training volume look like leading in? Were you prepared for the actual training volume and intensity?
I mean, looking back now, I could say that probably the intensity wasn't high enough.
Yeah.
I was doing a lot of volume, but going into that, like it wasn't like an end all be all race for me. So I know that when we talk about training intensity and like the excitation that comes with being on race day, like I didn't really feel that. Like I didn't have a lot of nerves associated with my triathlon.
You're not that
training.
kind of athlete.
It wasn't like, well, I would say like when I was doing CrossFit and I was going to regionals, I was hyped up for regionals.
Yeah.
And like that's like you can know the difference between like a training level of intensity and a game day level of intensity. Comparing that to my triathlon days, it wasn't like that. It was just like, oh, this is just kind of is what it is. Like that's aerobic racing for me. Is like you need to be kind of calm. You need to be kind of in the zone.
Prior to that race, had you done anything that was like 3 hours? Because your triathlon probably lasted about 3 hours, right?
That was like
distance,
2.5. Yeah.
Okay. So had you done anything that was of that duration continuously?
Probably the longest continuous one that I'd done was probably 2 hours. And that's a mix of on and off through a series of the combinations. So you do a little bike, do a little run, do a little swim, do a little bike. And then it's always trying to pull it all together. But like the longest duration was probably about 2 hours.
Cool. Yeah. Without any piece of it actually being the full duration or full distance. Yep. Yeah.
So that's actually what we kind of dive into in the course a little bit is, like, those are questions I would ask someone that, you know, like had issues with that, but with you don't have a history of cramps. So I don't think that the surge in volume is necessarily what would have caused it. It sounded like the hydration issue, like you'd said. But for someone like me, I'd have to look at both if that were to happen to me, because the surge in volume and intensity is something that has to, for someone who has a history of cramping, has to be something that's addressed in training leading up.
Yeah, it's not whenever, as someone who is, you know, extremely prone to cramping, whenever I get one, I love the advice that I get from all the people that are around. Well, have you ever tried electrolytes? Or you should eat a banana, or you're just dehydrated. It's like,
the banana is going to digest through my belly, get into my bloodstream and balance my electrolytes
in the next 60 seconds.
In the next 60 seconds to stop this quad is exactly what's going to happen.
And as if I, with what at this point, like almost 20-year training history, don't know anything about hydration or electrolytes or fueling my body. Thanks. I appreciate the advice. I don't know these things. No, it's like, I think one of the biggest misconceptions is that cramping is entirely related to your nutrition or hydration status, that it's almost dependent upon that. And Mike, I think, since you just went into this, you could probably touch on this a little more, because I think that's like the crux for me is like, it's not just about putting into your body.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of that research was based on a dated study, right? So there's an old study done in like the 1920s on a bunch of coal miners that were having basically work-related cramps of being in a hot and humid environment. And this research was done and taken that they just associated it with it, right? Like, okay, these are guys getting dehydrated. They're experiencing consistent cramps. So this is what is the leading cause of cramps. And kind of like how most studies are when they're the first to the market, they're the hardest to forget.
Right.
So that's what everyone is taught, kind of like low fat diet, that type of stuff. It's like, it's just hard to like pull out of your brain once you hear it originally and initially for the first time. So it's definitely changed. And there's a lot more research now on the neurological side of things, because those studies don't explain why someone cramps early in the middle of something, or early, like in an event or a race, or, what I would like classify as like a cold start cramp. Right. So anyway, the research, it's based off dated material.
So I think that kind of also, begs the question, like, if we talk about some of our worst cramping experiences, mine was actually this past summer during one of our games training sessions.
Yeah, that was so gnarly.
And in hindsight, like walking through it, like you can recognize some of the things that you just talked about, like the lack of volume preparation leading in. Hydration was not a factor. Yeah. But like
excitability leading into it.
Yeah, it was so here was the scenario. Basically, we had like a day that was just totally set aside for training in the middle of our games prep. And it was starting with the obstacle course. So we actually, had a pretty long drive to go do this obstacle course, O-race type situation. And, you go through all the obstacles and then you basically do a sprint. Like we ran with tires and we're doing, cargo nets, and
pretty challenging on like the nervous system, where it was like exciting and stressful because we're like jumping off of stuff and learning things.
A race scenario, right? So like we had all the times from the people before us. So you had an opportunity to go out there and try and set the fastest lap, which if you know anything about me, that's like what I'm trying to do is turn in the fastest lap. So like, I went hard. Then we got done with that, and it was maybe a 15-minute car ride to a bike transition where we were doing, what was that, a 22, 24 mile bike on. Yeah,
it was a long bike, long relative to what, normal like games athletes do. Yeah. Let me pause for a second and explain
how. Before you pause, because this man just said, if anyone knows me, I'm trying to turn in the fastest lap.
I can't help myself, but race.
I mean, we all were. That's what I was going to say. I was like, I was so disappointed in that obstacle course because I flew through it until the very last thing. The last obstacle was the rings, transferring ring to ring. And my grip was just so blown up. I just kept failing. And I was like, there goes my chances of beating anybody today in anything. But yeah, so we did the obstacle course and then we went and set up at a bike station. It's the Comet Trail here in Georgia, which is like made for cyclists. So it's like super long, not many interruptions. And so like that was pretty intense, the obstacle course. And then going and doing this, we fueled and had plenty of food and, like
plenty of
lots
water,
of fluid going in,
multiple gallons of water with us, for the entire day.
And you pushed hard. You rode at the lead pack with Travis and Sam and Alessandra.
So continuing that narrative, it was basically like, I looked at it as an opportunity for me to race with some of the best athletes in the sport, the best athletes that I have access to.
Yeah.
And I was like, I'm going to try to hang with Noah, Travis, Alessandra, who if you haven't been on a bike with her, it's kind of shocking how good she is on a road bike. Yeah. And then Sam Stewart, who is just an animal.
And he'd never done a long bike ride before, but like hung with the pack. He's impressive.
He didn't draft. So the four of us were like separate, and Sam was back behind us. And I was basically at the back of the
man.
drafting pack, just hanging out. And I took, so we were maybe 3 minutes into the ride, and I could feel the tops of my calves starting to do the like
like when they would shorten when you're like at the bottom of the pedal stroke.
Yeah. And I'm like, oh man, this is going to be a long bike ride.
Yeah.
If I want to hang with these guys. So I stayed back, and finally like the calf cramp kind of started to dissipate, and I was like, all right, I'm going to go. So I went to lead pack. So I rode, I passed everybody and took over the lead for a little bit. Cause this is going to be like an hour long bike ride. And I was like, all right, I'm going to take some of the heat for everybody. And within 30 seconds of getting to the lead pack, I felt my left VMO start to go.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh shit. I was like, gave him the signal, like, pass me. So I went to the back of the pack, and like, once I toned down a little bit and I was able to like back off the intensity of the bike, like the VMO cramp started to go away, and I was like, sweet. All right. So I settled in.
You calmed down basically.
Yeah. Once I calmed down, I was able to get the cramp to go away. But then it was like, so I had the left VMO a few minutes later, I think because my right leg was compensating for the lack of work with my left leg, my right VMO starts to go.
Yeah.
And it's like, it goes into a full cramp. So now I'm riding mostly with my left leg.
Yeah.
And now I'm going in this, like, I don't even have a good way to describe it, but it was basically like my right VMO would cramp, then my left adductor would cramp.
Yeah.
Then I would do most of the pedaling with my right leg, and then my right adductor would cramp. And it literally just worked its way through almost every major muscle group in my entire lower body.
Yeah.
And I rode through it. I suffered through that for an entire hour.
Yeah.
So it was like an hour of just like, okay, now I got to deal with this cramp and take over with the other leg, back and forth for the full, 60 minutes, and trying to stay with the group. Because if you get dropped from that drafting group, you're 5 miles
like me
an hour
right
slower.
away. Yeah. I was like 10 minutes behind y'all.
So we get done with that, and like, I can't walk by the time, getting off of the bike was the worst part. So like the moment we stopped and my feet hit the ground, it was like VMO is completely locked. VL is completely locked, hamstrings locked. And it's just basically like, you just sit there and there's nothing that you can do. And people, of course, all these,
there's a banana.
You're with some of the best athletes in the world, and you're sitting here like disabled on the ground, and they're okay.
Yeah. I mean, they offer, or maybe they like, threw you a banana or something for advice. And like, you can't say anything. It's just like, well, they're not cramping and they're way fitter. So,
so whatever you did is what would get rid of these cramps for me.
Yeah.
Did we have some guy at the camp one time, like have like a super, super bad cramp?
Yeah, no, he was outside.
I was like sitting in here, and I heard
he was outside when he cramped, and then he was around the side of the building. His quads locked up on him, and it was freezing cold outside because they had just done a workout inside. He went outside to try and cool off. He was around the side of the building without his phone. He cramped, fell down, couldn't get back up, and was stuck out there for like 20 minutes.
I feel you, man.
It was like nightmare fuel.
Hurt him.
Yeah, no, and so he like crawled his way around the building, like trying to like slap the wall.
Who
and
was
stuff.
it?
I forget his name, but oh my gosh, I remember thinking like, oh my gosh, I feel so bad for you.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what to do because
there really isn't that much that you can do for someone once they're in that cramping state. Mike, I mean, you touched on some of this stuff.
Yeah, something acidic like pickle juice. Like it's actually been researched and studied, like anything acidic, like pickle juice, mustards, things like that, basically have like the ability to decrease cramp duration by like 30 to 40% within like a minute.
The other thing that I've read,
they don't stop them from coming on, but they stop them while they're in the moment, and they reduce how long they actually last.
The other thing I've read but haven't played with is icing the nerve. So whatever the nerve that actually is feeding the muscle that's cramping. So like if it's your VM, I'm not sure which nerve innervates that, but if you can get an ice pack on the nerve that innervates the VMO, you could potentially get the cramp to go away. But like if you have someone whose entire lower body is locked up, like they're in double quad and simultaneous hamstring cramp, which I've experienced that before as well. In fact, that was part 3 of this training day, was the double quad.
Yeah. So going back to that, we're done with the bike ride. Now we get in the car and we have like a 2-hour drive to get back through traffic to go to the lake. And we're doing a long swim workout. So like from the start of the day, I looked at what we had and I'm like, I'm going to cramp.
Yeah.
Like I just know like the patterns of the contraction volume of riding on a bike after doing something super fast and powerful in the morning and then going to do a swim where you're using like opposing muscle groups. I'm like, this is the recipe for the perfect cramp. Yeah. So anyway,
have you always been a cramper?
I have. Yeah.
I remember the first real exercise-induced cramp that I ever got.
Yeah.
I was in high school. We were doing a start. So we were doing some sprints and I dove in and both calves completely locked up.
Yeah.
I went off the block and like,
yeah.
at that point, it was the first like real, muscle cramps that I'd ever had. And
Yeah.
I was underwater and I like went into a panic for a second, got myself out. And the only way that I could get rid of them was to go over to the lifeguard chair and like stand on the edge of the pool and literally force my calves out of the cramp.
Contractions are so strong sometimes. I want to know and see if there's any research or studies on how much force can be contracted sometimes or like sent to muscle groups when you're in like a hard cramp like that.
The other thing is the pain afterward, like not.
That's what I mean. Like
once the cramp releases, the DOMs that you get from that, the delayed onset muscle soreness for a week or 2 weeks.
That's what I'm saying. Think about how much force has to be created in the tissue
got a 2-week
for it to make you almost a week sore.
Yeah. Picture like the max voluntary contraction. Like it's probably more intense than that. So your muscle is hitting a level of intensity that it's not used to. And then it's holding that and unable to release the tension from it for how long? Like minute.
That one was
we
probably.
We had people go for a couple of minutes when you did that survey.
Yeah. I've had like up to 5 minutes max amount. Like
the swim that we did this
max
day.
Involuntary contraction.
Involuntary.
So essentially the event, so we did that bike and then the swim that we did that day was a 500 meter loop right into all four of us, four of the teammates were supposed to take the paddleboard and do a 250 meter loop, but like hanging onto the paddleboard.
Yeah.
Right?
Just
like,
swimming in the water while holding on to it.
Yeah. The games did an event like that, like the swim
with a
sled
lifeboat
or something like that. And so I started to get quad cramps during the swim.
Same here.
But I got out early enough that I actually could stretch them out and like had them gone by the time everyone else had gotten back. Mike, I don't think had any time to get rid of cramps.
No, I was the last out of the water. I was right behind Mia. We both kind of got out close to each other. Just went straight to the board and got in. And I got out and was like, guys, it's going to get bad. Like I could like doing my flutter kick while swimming. I could feel like I was trying to kick loosely because I would say like over 30% contraction in my quads, like trying to kick, I could feel it starting to like tighten up.
Within 50 meters, Mike is like, I'm out. Like,
I'm paralyzed in the water.
He's
I'm
done. Like, he's not doing anything. So we're like, Mike, get on the paddleboard.
Yeah. literally quads and hamstrings and calves are all cramped at the same time. And I don't know, there's no comfortable place to put your leg when that happens, because if your quad cramps, naturally, what do? You try and stretch and lengthen it. Mm-hmm. But then when you do that, your hamstring cramps. So you have to like meet right in the middle. So I had my knee slightly bent and the same thing in my ankle because even my tibs were cramping.
Yep. You meet right in the middle.
It's like
in the
nothing
zone
I did would stop it.
You're in the max pain zone because you're getting the cramps on both directions and you're just letting both of them stew. So as soon as Mike gets out, I'm like, all right, I got to pick up a little slack. You know, I'm a former swimmer. Yeah. Like I need to take care of the team now. As soon as I'm like putting a little extra effort into each kick.
Yeah.
Boom. There goes mine. Exact same cramps. Like double hamstring, double
Our
quad.
girls are like, what is wrong with these guys?
They're regretting their choices as teammates.
Yes.
I'm literally limp in the water, holding on to the board with one arm.
Just doing nothing.
and about every like 10th stroke, I'm like, Brandy, I got to switch sides because the arm that I was using to do the single arm strokes would start cramping.
Your last started cramping.
I would switch to the other side and do 10 strokes and have to switch back to the other. And eventually, we got to the buoy and my legs finally the cramp had finally released.
Yeah.
And I was like, all right, sweet. And Mike's like, oh, I'm feeling good. Mike got back in the water for
I don't know.
20 seconds.
We were swimming, dragging a paddle boat or a paddleboard, and then it quickly turned into literally a lifeboard. Cause like I was on it just like, and they're like, I thought Brandy was trying to hold my hand. She was actually using me to brace to pull the board. But anyways, it started
someone to hold your hand.
I literally just like I have to breathe. I have to try and relax. Cause it's like my nervous system's going ape shit. Yep. And I finally got them to like calm down. And I'm like, all right, guys, I'm good. So I hop back in the water to try and help. And they're like, just get back on the board. you're less help in the water than you are on the board. Yeah.
I have two questions.
Yeah.
So the first is, let's go back to the bike, right?
Yep.
You guys just got off the bike. You said that the moment that your feet hit the ground, you were paralyzed. All the other games athletes are walking around you. So two things that I'd like to ask about that. First, there's something genetic inherent about you, Kyle Ruth, that just makes you prone to cramps, right?
For sure.
Like compare you to Travis and Sam and Alessandra. There's something inherent about the way that your muscles are set up, the way that your nervous system is wired that makes you more prone to cramping. Is there anything else that you could have done on that day to prepare yourself for the intensity of that race, even knowing that you're a little bit more prone to those cramps?
Some of the things that I have found in hindsight that seem to help: blood flow restriction, ischemic preconditioning. So basically you put on a blood flow restriction band, do that for 5 minutes at 100% of occlusion pressure, then take it off, rest 5 minutes. And if I do a couple of cycles of that, I'm more resistant to cramping. It doesn't mean that I'm immune to cramping.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
I don't know if your body can ever
resistant.
be immune to cramping, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to think about, one, how can we maybe delay the onset of the cramping? And two,
Right.
how can we also dampen the amplitude of the cramping so it's not
Warm
as
up.
bad?
Warm up seems to be one of the best tools that I've got for preventing cramps. And what I could have done that day, the format of the day didn't allow for it. But in hindsight, like, I should have done this. It would have been as simple as, like, when everyone else was dicking around with their bikes and like getting their air, like my bike was ready to go. I could have got on, put it in a low gear, and just done loops around the parking lot until everyone else was ready to go at a low intensity. And doing something like that, it again probably wouldn't have prevented the cramps, but it would have delayed it. So it wasn't at minute 3. You know, I'm already starting to cramp. Like, it would have been minute 20 or minute 25, and it would have been a much less painful experience. With the swim, I don't think there was anything I could have done at that point outside of the other thing is, this is not something that I can do in the short
You could
term.
have swam with pickle juice.
Literally a jar of pickle juice as I go. This isn't a short-term thing, but for me, just 2 or 3 weeks of exposure to things that make me cramp, make me resistant to cramps in the future. And so, like, if I am just willing to go through the 2 weeks of getting terrible cramps in training or post-training or whenever they happen, because they do seem to happen all the time. If I can go through that for a couple of weeks and get that, get acclimated to it, then they don't happen anymore.
Yeah.
But as soon as I take like a 4-day, 3-day break, like we traveled for Thanksgiving and I was right back into the cramp zone. Like, I had 3 or 4 days off. And as soon as I started training again, foot cramps, calf cramps, VMO cramps, everything that I would do, the next session would always lead to a cramp.
Yeah, everyone basically has a cramp threshold, and it's highly dependent on genetics. Some people have a very low set point. Every time you experience a cramp exposure and you heal from it, that set point can get raised a little bit higher. So that's why we see like repeated cramp sessions, not intentionally or intentionally, but trying to induce them, whether it be through fatigue or literally, like, some people would do, electrical stimulation to try and like increase the threshold in a certain tissue. You see a response the next time you come back that threshold is just a little bit higher.
So to that point, I've had this conversation with people, and they're like, well, how do I know if I'm a low cramp threshold, which means you're really susceptible to cramps?
Yeah.
And it's like, you'll know because you can make yourself cramp.
Yeah.
Like right now, and I'm sure you're in the same boat, there are multiple muscle groups that I could just like point my toes and flex, and I could make my calves cramp. Or I can take my hand into flexion and flex, and I can make my forearm cramp up. Can you do that?
There's no way I could do that right now.
100%. Yeah.
I am a low cramp threshold person.
I'm
you are
trying
not.
to do it with my feet and my calves as much as I can.
I'm not going to do that because I'm just going to have to jump up from the table and walk it off. So like it's you can figure out if you're a low cramp threshold person very simply. Do you cramp post training, during events, during training? And can you induce a cramp yourself?
Yeah,
really easily.
But in the lab, they actually tried to quantify that threshold frequency, right? Like they had levels of the stim that they would put on, and we would say like, all right, you got to this level, this is your cramp threshold frequency, or whatever it was.
Right.
Yeah, but but those studies and that research has only been done specific to a tissue and not like a movement pattern. So like, it's not apples to apples, right? Like, so when someone has that conversation, when they ask the question, like, how do I know if I'm like, really prone to cramps? I'm like, I think you need to test it through training experience. Like, I think you need to go out and just run a race and see like, what was your intensity like when you pushed really hard? Did you notice that you started to have like an onset of, fatigue-based cramps later in the race in your quads, et cetera? And that kind of gives you some insight. And then you just try to prepare for that in the future. I don't think it's one of those, like when you're interviewing someone that you like do cramp tests on them. You just ask them, what's your history of cramping like? Or have you ever done long race and this is an issue? And
it's a continued back and forth. I think one of the things that you taught me both in the conversations that we've had and in your classroom series was that not only are there different factors that contribute to cramps in the moment, there's also different kinds of cramps. And like just the fact that somebody cramped, you can't really point a finger and say like, all right, this is what we have to do as an intervention to make you less prone to cramping or have the cramps not necessarily compromise your performance as much. And one of the things that I was thinking about was you're going down that story is there's probably a couple of different factors, right? Like your inherent cramp threshold frequency is probably higher than Travis's and Sam's and Alessandra's. Also, they might be a little bit more acclimated to race formats than you were. Like your training up to that point was a lot of group training that was longer, that you were working together with people, that you were cooperating. It wasn't necessarily like race formats. You got out there and you raced for the first time, and probably like, I forget what that was, but that was a long build up to the games.
A long span.
Yeah.
Right? Whereas every day they go out in their race and they're relatively desensitized to it from like a performance anxiety standpoint,
exactly.
right? So like what Mike was talking about earlier with my triathlon stuff, he was asking, what was the intensity like? And I think that one of the things that Mike taught me is, if your intensity on game day is levels above your intensity during training, that can absolutely be a factor in a cramp being ready to happen. And so if we were to take that and say like, all right, ignore the fact that Kyle's walking around cramp threshold frequency is abnormally high, right? If he is going into a race that we know that he's going to be a little bit more excited about, maybe a little bit more anxious about, and we know that that might be a cause for him to ramp the intensity up and put himself at a higher risk of cramping, what can we do to try and get around that in the moment? Because I think that's a short-term fix that might be really useful for somebody.
Yeah. I mean, that's a conversation you have with like about trade-off, do we do things that would lower, your excitation leading into an event like that, where it might even suppress like your nervous system power a little bit as a trade-off to potentially stopping a debilitating cramp, because that's worse than being a little dampened in power,
For sure.
Like when you hit a cramp in a race like that, like you're almost done at some points and you have to come to a dead stop. That is way worse than a 5% reduction in power, So I think like that's a conversation you have with clients is like, okay, stretching beforehand, all these tools that you can do to try and like calm the nervous system and prepare the tissues better is going to be a better trade-off, just so you can express power more efficiently.
Well, I think along those same lines as well, you said there's different types of cramps, and I think there's some reality to that. There is probably dehydration cramps and hyperhydration cramps. And
yeah,
I think those things are probably different than, lack of exposure for better, lack of acclimation type cramps.
Yeah.
The other thing is I think each individual probably will have a different set of tools that works well for them for preventing cramps. Like I said, I know at this point what mine are for the most part. It's long-term sodium bicarbonate ingestion. It's the blood flow restriction, IPC protocols, and then making sure that I warm up properly for whatever I'm doing. And maybe the warm up dampens some of the, the going from 0 to 100 type intensity thing or something like that. That's what works really well for me. Maybe that's a starting point for some other people, but that's also probably different than what works well for preventing cramps for you, because you're also someone who's extremely susceptible.
Yeah. I mean, mine just comes down to surges in volume and fatigue. So there's not any like hardcore research or evidence that shows that being fatigued prior to a race and you come in and you're more prone to cramp. When I say fatigue, I mean like sleep, not necessarily like muscle fatigue. There actually is research and study on that, but I mean like not feeling rested and my nervous system being tired going in. I actually have experienced more cramps from that, even though maybe that's anecdotal and I can't necessarily like prove that, but that's what I feel. The other thing for me is like if I just look at my training volume leading in and the contractions that are going to be necessary in that race, I haven't even like hit 50% of that, which does happen a lot because like we do crazy shit here on site all the time. And, one of my worst cramp cases ever that I can remember was when we used to have the engine path in previously design, now compete. I wrote this really long, like cyclical test that was like kind of like the ending of one of the cycles for like long aerobic base building that we were doing. And it was a 5K run on the runner, a 10K bike erg, I think 300 cal assault bike, and then a 5K row. So it was really long. And I was like, I'm going to do it. No, I have not been hitting all the progressions, but I'm going to do it because I wrote it and I like want to just, contribute to the community and just like show that I'm doing this too. And I didn't cramp during it because I was like sipping on pickle juice and doing my best to stay hydrated, even though now I'm learning more, like it didn't really, it
wouldn't have mattered.
The temperature wasn't that high. I wasn't like losing like a ton of fluid, but I was consuming enough to like balance that. Right. I think relative to how much I was actually losing. We'll talk about the pickle juice a little bit more in a minute, but anyway, I get to the end of it and going from running, so like a ton of eccentric loading on the quads, which I hadn't been training for, going into the bike. So now a bunch of concentric only contractions in the quads. So a ton of fatigue in the quads. And then you go on to a row, and that's like a recipe, right? You're pressing more with the legs, putting the quad in a shortened state over and over and over. So that's just like creating a ton of disruption in, in the relationship between GTO and muscle spindles. So like things just started locking up really quickly.
So what you're saying is you're basically confusing the hell out of the nerves. When you're doing that.
I mean, there's just
basically
overload between the communication between those two.
Right.
And by that point, like the row, I couldn't fully extend my row,
you
halfway
have to
through
stay
it.
with a soft lockout.
Yeah, exactly.
With every stroke.
So I was just basically done at that point. Anyways, so I get done, we finish it, and Ryan Sullivan actually did it with me, Coach Ryan. And I get done and I'm like, oh boy, here we go. And I sit down, and then that's when they set in bad. I mean, some of the worst, hardest contractions I've ever had in my quads as a cramp. So I'm like putting my legs on the wall, and I took a picture. I think I sent it to one of you too, but it looked like a mutant in my leg.
Yeah.
Like the striations and separation in my quads, it was disgusting. It looks like they had ruptured, and I'm like trying not to scream, but I'm in so much pain. So I try to like bend my leg and put them on the wall, and then my hamstrings go into full cramp. So I'm just literally like bent knee, just sitting there screaming. And of course, naturally, like you can't calm down. You're kind of freaking out, and like there's nothing I can do at that point. Ryan's bringing me Gatorades, fluid, like none of it's working. Finally, I was like, I have pickle juice in my bag. So he goes and gets the pickle juice, and I drink it, and it like starts to calm down like almost instantly. And then finally I'm like doing deep breathing and trying to relax, just trying to get my nervous system to calm down, and it finally started to chill out. But by far, like that was one of the most intense, like short duration cramp cycles I've ever had.
Okay. Pickle juice. So you drank pickle juice and it started to relieve the cramp. This is something that when I first heard about it, I was like, it's an old wives' tale. And then I started to see some of the research on it, and I've tested it. I found it not to be a particularly effective preventative, but a good remedy.
Now we're talking about a dill pickle, one of them sweet pickles.
Spicy.
Yeah.
The
Spicy.
pickles in the bag pickles.
Spicy pickles.
Does it matter?
It doesn't matter. I mean, you're not eating a pickle. It's just, juice. Anything that kind of has that acidic tone. So like, that's why I say like mustards, and the popular one in the endurance world is Hot Shot. It's like a mix of that type of stuff. But yeah, I mean, if you think about it, right, there's no way that you can ingest it and it create a change in sodium structure, internally that quickly, so it has to be something neurological, and there's a lot of research and studies behind it. And that's where the big misconception is like, oh, you have to drink pickle juice to stay, hydrated and keep your electrolytes balanced. And that's not what it's doing necessarily. What it's doing is creating some type of response in the nervous system that lowers alpha motor neuron drive in the moment almost instantaneously. So you actually feel a reduction in the cramp intensity and duration.
So essentially it's telling your nervous system to stop firing the muscle,
to calm
and the muscle
down.
finally will relax to some degree.
Yeah, exactly.
Now you said it's not preventative, it's a remedy, but really could it be preventative if he had done it like in his last little bit of a row, or when he switched to go from the run to the row?
So that's actually, I'll jump in on that, but like I actually do ingest it while I'm in training. So I did a triathlon with Travis and Brandy, and I had good volume buildup leading into it, but I just knew like we're traveling there, we're getting all of our bikes and shit set up. I know I'm just not going to sleep well. The race starts at like 7 a.m. So I just like looking at it ahead of time, I was like, this is like a good recipe for me to like cramp up. I'm excited and like I want to do well. And anytime it starts, I mean, every time a triathlon starts with a swim, but anytime I start with a swim in any environment, I'm overexcited. Like I try to calm down and relax, but it's not my strongest movement. So I'm like overexcited. So I just knew like that going into bike and then ending with running where you're, hitting a bunch of, eccentric loading, it always causes me to cramp. So I get on the bike and I actually have a mix of Gatorade, water, and pickle juice. It's disgusting, but I sipped on it the whole way. And I actually raced really hard. And actually outran Brainy on that, which has never happened.
Take that, Brainy.
I started to feel a slight onset in cramps, but I feel that they did not kick in as strong because I had been ingesting it.
Didn't go to a full cramp. It was
did
in
not, and I was actually able to race really hard. Very close to the end, it started to kick in a little bit, but I mean, I did training sessions leading into it that were like way worse. So I think it had a big impact.
When I say not preventative, what I mean by that is like at the CrossFit Games, Mike and I were drinking shots of pickle juice before we would go out for an event. And that's probably not going to prevent cramping. But if you're in an endurance type environment where you can, sip on things as you're going, especially when you first start to feel the initial onset of that cramp, that's when it's going to be a little bit more effective. But like daily loading of pickle juice is not something that's going to be like a long-term cramp preventative type tool.
That makes sense. I mean, I was trying to map this over to CrossFit, right? So like with Mike's triathlon example, it was really more about this idea, like he knew the task ahead of him, right? Like he was able to prepare for the volume. He was probably a little bit aware of the ramp up of intensity. Like he was saying, like he was overexcited for the swim, and that's just something he knows about himself. When you guys go to the CrossFit Games, you are probably going to face some sort of high volume test that you couldn't have thought of ahead of time, that you physically probably are going to be a little bit underprepared for in terms of like a local muscle endurance or just contraction volume, right? What are the kinds of things inside of that moment that could help us to try and get out ahead of maybe like potential cramps? One of them I thought I heard was, first off, let's try and make sure that we don't overexcite ourselves, right? Taking a 5% decrease in power production is probably worth the compromise versus getting overexcited, cramping.
If you're prone to cramping.
If you're prone to cramping, right? The other one is this option of maybe trying to do something like your warm up, where you try and like, this is going to have a systemic impact on me independent of the local muscles, right? So I could do BFR, I could do a longer warm up, I could try and get the blood moving through like a little bit more evenly, right?
Yeah.
And then you guys sip pickle juice. That just sounds disgusting to me. Like you could put it in your mouth and swish it around and spit it out.
I feel like it's genetic who likes pickle juice or not. Cause it's like some people, like those who like it, love it. And like it tastes great.
It.
And then there's people that just hate it. It's very polarized.
So wait, do you like it or hate it?
Yeah, I like it.
Okay.
I mean, I don't like go and buy it and like drink it like, you know.
I was really hoping that like
fun,
from an evolutionary standpoint, the people who were prone to cramping actually liked pickle juice, because your body's like, you're gonna need this down the line. You're gonna need this.
Seriously, I associate it with being calm though. So like I sip on it before the games events because it helps me calm down. Because when I'm overexcited and amped up, like everything in my body feels twitchy.
Yes.
Like I'm like in a constant state of like ready to just like.
Is it like a pregnancy craving, pickles?
I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard that.
I
never craved them when I was pregnant, but
no, same reason, right? They're trying to get out ahead of the cramps that are coming.
No, before each event, Mike he'd pull out the jar of pickle juice and he's like, all right, let's take our shots. And he's taking big swigs, and I'm like, preparing
holding
myself.
His nose. Like,
oh, fuck, this is awful. There's one food that I really dislike. It's pickles. So drinking pickle juice is like as bad.
Maybe
as
try mustard.
Yeah, I like mustard. So maybe I'll just,
I've never done it, but they say it has the same reaction.
Down a shot of mustard before I go out to compete.
Yeah, or get the hot shots.
The other problem is like pickle juice is so gross to me that the idea of drinking pickle juice like intra event. Imagine you have like an interval.
Imagine
event.
mixing it with orange Gatorade.
Oh, well, that might be better for me, to be honest. Just like take some of the edge off of it. But I couldn't imagine trying to do like there was that games event where it's like rope climb, overhead squat, skierg, right? And like that would be one that would cause me to cramp up, right? My biceps would cramp in that. And like there was time in between each of those intervals to take a shot of pickle juice, but I couldn't imagine doing that. I'd throw up. Yeah. For sure.
Yeah. I mean, that's how badly I cramp and how badly I hate it. Is that I'm willing to drink that shit.
Would probably be worth it in that. If I were like, in that scenario.
No question. Not a problem at all. Yeah.
One of the other things that I think is interesting is like, I've found this over and over and over that intervals, I'm much less likely to cramp than a long continuous piece, right?
Yeah.
So if I were to do, imagine the following, 5 1K runs at 5K pace. And
sounds familiar.
Yeah, I just did this. Scenario 1, it's like rest 4 minutes or rest 3 minutes between them. And scenario 2 is like 3 minutes of active recovery on, concept 2 bike, or 3 minutes of active recovery walking. I would cramp with the active recovery and not cramp with the passive recovery.
Do you know? So I have some theories on that. I think one, even comparing it to just 5K of volume, because you're doing the same amount of volume. So in theory, you could say like the fatigue would be similar, but you talked about using the IPC protocols to prevent occlusion, and occlusion leads to premature fatigue, right? So there's ATP blockage, and there's a lot of research that has shown that when you occlude, you're basically shutting off power production, and that can create premature cramps. So I think when you do something like intervalize like that, you're reducing the amount of occlusion that you're getting between sets versus if you just went 5K straight.
Yeah, see, that's why I was asking Adam at the beginning when he was talking about his triathlon experience, did he do anything that was 2 hours continuous in the same distances for each of the modalities? Like, did he do a full simulation before?
Yeah.
Or was it all interval based? And I think that's kind of where I was going is like, when you take a long endurance event, it's so intuitive for you to make intervals that add up to the distance, or make intervals that add up to longer than the distance, and do that. It's different than just doing a full-on simulation and even saying to the person, all right, for the first 200 meters or first 400 meters, I want you to go out hard. Practice going out hot, blowing up and settling in, because that's how, 99% of the races in CrossFit, 99% of triathlons are going to go. So when you are, not looking at the short-term preparation, but the long-term preparation, if you're someone who is prone to cramping and you're going to be doing a 5K run in a competition or,
and they're going to be amped up. Yeah.
You need to go out and do that.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I think with Adam, he was safe and probably could get away with more intervalized training to work on speed. But for someone like us, we got to hit the volume and we have to have touches of intensity. I actually talk about that in the course. I use a training scenario and I walk through like an example athlete, and this is their attributes and what they're prone, what their cramp proneness is like in training. And I walk through like 6 weeks of what preparation could look like for the test that they're doing.
Man, I think that should inform what we're doing for Wodapalooza. So Adam, all I'm going to do from here on out are just long, high intensity Metcons and long swims. Cause I'm guaranteed I swam last night, foot cramps within, 400 yards into the session, both feet just completely cramped up. When that happens and I kick my big toes together and my big toes hurt for a week.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. What's interesting is like, I don't talk about this much in the course because it's not necessarily like, I would like kind of classify this more under like hypertrophy training, but you've actually had increases in muscle size
from cramping. And it makes sense because if you think about it, it is like when you go through a cramp cycle, your muscles are contracting with a lot of intensity. And so much so that we talked about like the DOMs it creates, sometimes 2 to 10 days after that. And then obviously you're going to heal from that. That repair process includes like the muscle growing and tissues building. So I'm not saying that someone should do that. Like, but I think you had some research and some studies on them actually like inducing cramps to try and create hypertrophy in the tissue. Cramp induced hypertrophy. The research was
sounds so awful.
Yeah. So, but if you think about the mechanism of hypertrophy, right? What do you need? You need mechanical loading. Well, with a cramp, you've got
more than you would ever need.
Plenty of mechanical loading. You need muscle fiber fatigue, right?
Yep.
Like not just, I did a hard set of bicep curls. You need muscle fiber fatigue to stimulate hypertrophy. And then one of the things we know is that blood flow restriction, that getting some occlusion can actually stimulate hypertrophy through a different mechanism. And a cramp has all three of those mechanisms built into it. So essentially, I just look at it like my proneness to cramping is also what makes it so I can get, jacked
more
VMOs.
Jacks,
jacked VMOs, calves, and
perfect pump.
Yeah. I've never noticed I've actually never measured it. Maybe I did. Maybe I got bigger this summer because we cramped a lot. But what I did notice, through the summer though, is like we went to the games. I didn't have any cramping issues. Nope. And like we started with a swim and it was a pretty long event and we did a lot of upper body pulling later that day and we did a kayak race. And I was super proud that I didn't have any cramping issues in my lats or biceps, considering that we were like, kayaking,
swim into kayak,
which is just like
without the preparatory volume would have guaranteed that I would have gotten a cramp, especially racing the way that I was trying to catch Rich.
Yeah.
And I couldn't.
Yeah. I mean, there was definitely a lot of intensity and excitement going into that event. So anyways, I think the prep leading up was helpful. And like we had a couple of those sessions, like the long Murph one that we had where I think we talked about in a previous episode, but basically the whole team ran with like an 80 pound. No, it was like 100 and.
No, it was a 200 pound. We had loaded 200 pounds on the litter.
Yeah. And
had weight vests on.
I remember cramping. We did a mile with it. And I remember cramping the first 800 meters in. Like we were all wearing a vest, carrying a 200 pound litter. So immediately like my calves and quads are cramping. And then we come in and we do 100 worm push press. So like eccentric loading of the quads, lit up my legs right away.
Big sets, fast turnover. There was a lot. So we were
amped up. We were like, Team Murph, let's go.
We went from pretty low intensity, just kind of continuous, right into super high intensity. And then everything that we did after that worm push press resulted in a cramp for me. So we were both pretty messed up. We were doing chest to bar and I had cramps in both forearms, both biceps, and both lats simultaneously.
Like once again, our girls are just like, what
are they doing? And then we were doing squats and like we got through the squats okay. And then by the time Mike and I had transitioned from the worm squats to outside, both of us were in balls of cramp again.
It is fascinating that it seemed like men are just so much more prone to cramping than women. Like I've never seen Mia or Brandy cramp up.
to exercise-induced muscle cramps.
Exercise-induced,
Make sure that you're
EAMCs.
very specific about the type of
for
cramp
sure
that you're referring to.
Yeah, I feel like the kinds of cramps that females might get a little bit more often are kind of like that side stitch sort of cramp while they're running or rowing or something else. It just anecdotally, it seems like that's the kind of thing that seems to onset with them a little bit more versus like the muscle bellies.
You know what's weird? I'm not prone to those at all.
Yeah.
The side stitch, I never get.
I get them.
I get those, but I'm probably a little bit more similar to females with my sympathetic tone.
Two things that helped me actually get rid of that, and I don't know. I mean, I'm assuming I don't know a lot about side stitches. Maybe you could add more to this, but I think it is intercostals cramping. So it's a muscle cramp inside the rib cage. For me, it's too much when I have too much fluid. Like if I have like a full belly of water, I like notice like there's always some kind of connection there. The other thing is when I do like aggressive exhales. So I'm like trying to lengthen those tissues and like go through full ranges of motion of contraction with whatever part of the ribs are cramping. That seems to like get rid of it almost instantly.
Interesting.
Yeah. Have you had that before?
No. When I was in graduate school, that was the concept of side stitch was like a common topic, and they just didn't. You'd talk to people that were researchers about it, and they'd be like, "We don't really know."
Yeah.
Like we think it might be the diaphragm rubbing against a full stomach, a stomach full of water.
Yeah, I haven't found much
friction might be causing it. Or
the biggest thing that I've found that's helped that or tried to address it inside the moment is physiological size. And it's I think based around the idea of tension around your diaphragm and around your intercostals, but it's you do 2 super sharp inhales through your nose to try and fill up your lungs a little bit more, and then it's a long exhale out, and you do a series of those. And what you'll notice is picture Harper or Addison when they start crying, right?
Yeah, the thing that they do when they calm
do
down.
it naturally to calm themselves down. That you will hear the kids make that sound.
Yeah.
But if you can get somebody to do that while they're running, when they have a side stitch, it goes away within like 3 cycles of it.
In the book Oxygen Advantage, I want to say it's Patrick
McCowan,
who wrote that. He talks about post-workout with the goal being to bring your heart rate down, to basically downregulate your nervous system. That what you can do is do a full exhale, hold your breath for as long as is tolerable, inhale 2 cycles. And when you do, if you actually do this, you almost automatically go into that double inhale. So you do your first one and then you breathe out. And then when you breathe in the second time, it's like that. So it's almost, he's almost like tricking you into doing the double sigh. Yeah. What did you call it?
Physiological sigh is the word. I learned about it from the Andrew Huberman podcast, but there's something that's inherent about that double inhale that has to go before the exhale. It's not just this idea. Cause like when we teach somebody how to calm themselves down, we think about blow air out through your mouth, right. Do it long, make sure you get all the air out of your lungs, hold after the exhale for a second. But placing the double inhale before, especially through your nose, I think what it does is it actually improves your ability to offload carbon dioxide because you are sort of like filling things up inside and then you can offload it after the fact.
That's fascinating.
But what's crazy about it is like kids do it naturally. And then after I read that, I went and like, after Caleb had a crying fit, I heard him do it and I was like, holy shit.
Yeah, you've definitely observed it in your kids. But what I've noticed is doing the Oxygen Advantage version of that, you can watch your heart rate drop significantly. Yeah. So like if normally post interval, you're getting down to 120 pretty quickly. If you go through that breath hold cycle that almost triggers the physiological sigh, you'll be down to like 80 beats per minute in the same amount of time that you would normally be down to 120.
Which to me probably says that if you're getting a side stitch while you're running, more often than not, you're probably holding a little bit too much tension around your midline. Like if that's going to be one of the best ways to relieve the stitch that you have is to actually try and get yourself to relax around here. That's probably for me like one of the leading causes. But I think that's just me like, trying to theorize around it.
I'm going to try a physiological sigh next time I'm getting a really bad cramp. See what happens.
Something else that we didn't really talk about. We talked about like prolonged fatigue-based cramps from like an overload of contraction volume. We also talked about hydration and electrolyte imbalance issues. I just want to throw around some ideas and have some fun with it, discussing methods of cramp prevention when you're like in a non-fatigue state. Like in the course, I actually classify these as cold start cramps. I don't know if that's actually a thing, but that's like how I'm explaining them is like, for example, you go to set up for bench press and you create tension and your hamstrings cramp up, right? Like if you've had that, kind of like what we talked about earlier in the show, you can like create a cramp by putting in a short and length right away.
Squats and I pull down on the lats to create some tension on the bar and kind of tighten everything down, my lats will cramp up.
I mean, it has nothing to do with fatigue. It has nothing to do with
it's not
hydration.
even the muscle that's under serious load.
Yeah,
it's just in a short position and you apply tension to it.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think those are interesting to talk about and why that happens and ways you can do to prevent it. There's a lot of things like synergistic dominance that play a big part in why a certain muscle group would pre-fatigue early. Like, so for example, someone that gets a lot of ab cramps early, like in a workout when they're doing like a high amount of sit-ups or toe to bar or something, you could say that that's a big movement inefficiency issue. So, maybe some of the other prime movers that are responsible for helping with like core flexion or compression in like a sit-up or a toe to bar aren't necessarily kicking in the way that they should. So the dominance is coming from the abs. So you pre-fatigue that early.
To that same point, one of the things that I've done is actually antagonist stretching. So if toes to bar is a really good example, because that's one, if I cold start toes to bar and I go do a max rep set, I'm guaranteed to get an ab cramp.
Yeah.
Like no matter what I do afterward, I'm going to be in a state of ab cramp. But if I do like walking toe touches or inchworms or something like that to lengthen hamstrings and just open up my ability to go into global flexion, then I'm way less likely to get the cramps. It's like I'm fighting against my own tension less. And so the cramp is less likely to happen.
Yeah. I see that. I always thought that's interesting because it blows my mind how you can manipulate it in that way. And I've like kind of taking a deep dive on that stuff and looking at like the muscle anatomy and some of the internal function that happens. Cause I've got this weird thing that happens when I like go out onto the floor. And if I don't warm up like my squat pattern very slowly and smoothly and like get my tissues actually warm, if I drop down into a squat really quickly, it feels like my quads are going to rupture. And I looked into that for a while and I was talking to Kyle Habdo about it. And we think it's something to do with muscle spindle activity. So muscle spindles are responsible for basically sending feedback on how long a tissue gets, right? And it will contract it if it feels like it's being overstretched.
Right.
So it's like responsible for proprioception. And I feel like sometimes when I go down into that stretch, my quad is lengthening really quickly. So it sends a quick feedback response to stop it. And it makes it feel like a cramp, which I've always thought was really interesting. Cause I'm like, I don't know.
It probably makes you also more prone to muscle strains, because if you get that really quick contraction in response to the muscle lengthening, that's one of the things that causes muscle strains for people that are like,
people that are, there's definitely data that's proven that people that are high prone to cramping are also very prone to tendon injuries and ruptures.
Man, is there anything good?
I don't know, but we've had a ton of tendon injuries.
And you guys are both super strong.
Yeah. I mean, it comes out of the nervous system.
Jump really high.
Yeah.
There's lots of good that comes with it. You just have to kind of look at the other side of it. Like, what is it about yourself that makes you prone to cramping? You have high sympathetic tone. You have like lots of tension. You occlude easily. Like all of that also lends to hypertrophy and high power output. Like
you end up with some great stories, like, having had jaw cramps in this muscle underneath your neck, whatever that thing is. You've had that one?
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah. From like a deep yawn.
Yep.
Yeah. Your jaw's like shortened state. So
you guys are ridiculous.
One of the most recent worst ones I've ever had. You see this cut on my lip?
Yeah. This is from a cramp.
No.
Okay.
But I cramped after immediately, which was just like kicking a dog while he's down. I'm at the hotel this weekend at the Legends Masters comp, getting a workout in late at night. And I'm like already like kind of stressed out. It's like late, not stressed cause like I'm not having a good time, but it's just like, you go coach, you're like, you're on your feet and it's an exciting environment. I'm like, I want to get a quick workout in. So I do like a long warm up and then I do some like midline core work. And I actually like do like a bunch of crunches and sit ups and planks and stuff like that. I'm like, all right, I want to do some power work now. So I go and I get a med ball. And without even like testing it or warming up or anything, I just naturally, I want to see like what it's like slamming it on the ground. I'll do some slam balls. I slam it as hard as I fucking can into the floor. It rebounds back and hits me right in the mouth. I mean, like hard. I felt like I got kicked in the face. And I'm like, oh God, I fall to the floor. There's people in there.
No.
There's people in there.
You have witnesses.
They all pretended not to see it. Like,
even better.
Cause I hit the ground and I look around and no one's looking at me.
What would you prefer in that moment? For them to come over and make a big deal about it?
It was great.
Yeah,
so anyway, I hit the ground
response.
and when I balled up, my abs cramped. so my abs cramped and I immediately shot back into like a plank and I'm stretching and I'm like, fuck, like my lip feels weird. And then I didn't like know that like I busted my lip, but I look down and like blood is like pooling out. I'm like, oh my
No,
God,
what the best
a
response
disaster.
is once you recognize that Mike's cramping on the floor is to come over and give him advice about cramping. You should
bet
really
you
work
didn't
on your
drink enough
hydration.
Don't do that. Please don't do that.
Oh shit.
Anyways, I like grabbed my towel, grabbed all my stuff and just like, I mean, I had to like wipe up the blood, but dude, I'm running through the hallway and like, I haven't been hurt like that in a while. Like I didn't know what to do. You know,
my ball and I'm going
I'm at a hotel. Like, it's not like I can just
Can't
like
go talk to Brandy.
I don't have a rental car. Like, yeah, like Brandy, and she's 4 hours ahead of me in time. So like, I'm running through the hallway and I like see a guy that's working there and I'm like, hey man, I got this going on. And he's like, God. And he's like, I was like, do you guys have like first aid or anything or some ice? And he's like, go to the bar. And I'm like, I'm not going to the bar. You go to the bar. I was like, I got blood everywhere. There's like people out there. And he's like, all right, I'll be right back. So he goes and he was super cool and got me an ice pack. I mean, I wasn't going to put ice on it. It's like bleeding everywhere. I was like, I needed like cotton or something. I don't know, petroleum jelly.
Ab cramps are the best, especially when you're around people who like have never had a cramp or have no experience with it. And then you show them the ab cramp where it actually looks like they're
There's a mutant coming out
from Alien where it's like
Yes.
popping out. They're
Yes.
like, oh my God, what is that? You're like, this is a normal Tuesday ab cramp for me.
I saw your ab cramp from the other side of the gym one time. You guys were over there doing some team session. I was on the runner by the bay door and I could see your ab cramping from across the gym.
They hurt really bad. I mean, I think that like quads and hamstrings can hurt worse, but they're the weirdest sensation when they happen because they're contracting, but they feel like they're folding into themselves somehow. Like there's origami going on in your stomach.
Yeah, you're sucking your intestines.
And I'm
through
always
the hole.
wondering like, what happens if I just let it go? Like if I just don't resist it,
So-
am
Mike
I
turns
just
into
okay.
a black hole.
inside out boy? Like,
I'm gonna leave with my final piece of advice. As someone who's cramped a shitload of times, more times than I could possibly care to recount or convey to people.
Just give us a number.
Yeah, well into the 2,000 to 3,000 range. Dude, it's daily. Every time I lay down in bed, my feet cramp. Literally every single time I lay in bed, my feet cramp up.
I did not expect thousands.
Haley laughs every night.
Yeah.
She's like, what the fuck? And I have to get up. I'm like, damn it. Again, I get up and I walk around for a minute, I lay down, then the other foot will cramp. So I have to get up, walk around for a minute, and I can lay down and I'm good to go once they've gone. But first off, at some point you have to, if you're really prone to it, you have to learn to just like accept the cramp and just deal with it and not try and stretch it because
Stretch it.
The DOMS is worse when you stretch it because you have this muscle, it's under a shitload of tension.
Yeah.
And then you go to stretch it. And as soon as you do that, man, you are like just ripping tissue. You're creating a ton of tissue damage. So if you can just sit there and let the cramp pass, first off, I found I'm much less likely to get the same cramp again than if I stretch it to get rid of it. And two, I get way less DOMS.
So when you say stretch it to get rid of it, so say that I'm cramping in my bicep, right?
Yeah.
Instead of trying to lengthen out my elbow, just kind of stay there for a moment and try and calm myself down.
Yeah, maybe lengthen it a little bit so that you're not in like deep flexion, but not when I say stretch it, I mean like don't actively open it up.
Yeah,
So like
don't try and like break through it.
Yeah, if you get a calf cramp, it's okay to pull your toes up to kind of
Yeah.
reduce some of the calf cramp tension. But what I'm talking about is like going to the wall and like aggressively stretching your calf.
Yeah,
That's the one that's going to create the
It's funny
the DOMS.
because like when we were soccer players, that's like you would always cramp in your calves late in the game, right? You're fatigued, you've been running for 90 minutes. And then the first thing that one of your buddies comes over and does is he grabs your foot and forces you into dorsiflexion to try and relieve the tension inside of your calf.
In my mind, at least in my experience, that makes you more likely to have that cramp again in the short term and will give you way more DOMS throughout the next week and 2 weeks. I've actually had 2 week DOMS.
I mean, personally, I would kind of counter that because one, I want the cramp to stop because it's very painful. But two, you're actually resetting some of the chemical structure when you lengthen a tissue. And we talk about that more in the course, but like, I mean, it makes sense. Like you don't want to you want to do whatever you can to prevent the amount of damage that could happen long-term, like the DOMS, and like that would create some long-term fatigue and mess with performance. But no one wants to sit through a cramp. So, I mean, I think that the natural response when a muscle goes through a spasm is to lengthen it because that resets, the connection and the conversation between GTO and muscle spindle activity. Like it actually resets it and stops it. So, it's one of those, like, as long as it's not one of those where you have literally like a potential risk of damaging the tissue or rupturing tendon by like
I've always wondered
that
is there a real risk of tearing a muscle through a cramp?
Oh,
because I've never torn.
I mean, I think if the contract, I feel like, I mean, I think that's that one I was telling you about when I did that long endurance tests from our program, I felt like if I literally tried to lengthen my quad, that it was going to like tear. But what I don't know is, can there be serious damage if you just kind of like sit and let it run its course?
I've done that a lot.
Which is super hard to do.
I've done it a lot.
Yeah. But when I've tried to just ignore it and relax and calm down, it actually feels like it subsides as quickly.
And what I found
but it's just very painful doing that.
It's less likely to come back if I do that. Like if I let the muscle fatigue itself out, it's less likely to come back versus if I try active interventions to get rid of the cramp.
Yeah.
Good luck.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think check out the course because we actually do a good job of organizing like the different times that cramps might come in, like early onset or cold start cramps, fatigue based onset, delayed onset. They're all very different. And we go through a whole series of assessments and tools that would help you kind of address each of the different types of cramps that we talked about. So like, hydration based or neurological based or fatigue based training examples and scenarios. Is a lot of information in there.
Yeah. I think the training example one was really cool at the end where like, if you have this idea of like, all right, I know that I'm setting myself up to go to this event where it's very likely I'm going to cramp. How can I try and get ahead of that? That's a very useful practical example for a lot of coaches.
Yeah.
Well, if you're watching on YouTube and you have an awesome cramp story, make sure you share it in the comments.
Because I love reading it.
I would love to hear people's cramp stories.
I sent out an Instagram post and I talk about it in the course, but I just asked everyone like, what's your experience with this? And I loved reading some of the stories. People are passionate about it. From one fellow cramper to another, it's a hot topic.
Yeah. We're out here. You're not alone, fellow crampers.
All right. Thanks guys.
Yep.